This is the recipe that started it all for me. When I was a single graduate student, I was living in California and my parents were back in Texas. I called my mom one day to ask what they were eating for dessert and she said Texas chocolate sheet cake. Now a Texas chocolate sheet cake makes a giant jelly roll pan-sized cake. It's like a 10 by 12 cake. And I knew if I made her recipe, I would be left with leftover chocolate cake forever. So I decided to scale it down and now I make it in a quarter sheet pan size. This is the perfect chocolate cake. It's so simple to make. It's a one bowl cake and the frosting is poured on warm while the cake is still cooling. You are going to love this cake. So let's get started. All right, I preheated my oven to 350 degrees and then we're gonna make the cake. We're gonna start with the dry ingredients. So into a bowl goes 1 cup of flour, 1 cup of sugar, super easy to remember. And I stir this together with a whisk and 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt. That is it for your dry ingredients. Just whisk this together really well and set it aside. And then we're gonna make the chocolate part. So over a medium flame, we're going to melt an entire stick of butter. This recipe has 2 different wet components. One is on the stove and then one we're gonna whisk together. The reason we melt our butter is because we cook our cocoa powder in it and it just blooms and enhances the chocolate flavor. We're gonna let that melt before we add our cocoa powder. Okay, my butter is all the way melted. I'm gonna turn it down and then we're gonna add 2 heaping tablespoons of cocoa powder. As soon as the cocoa powder hits the butter, the fragrance is intoxicating. This is a great cake to make for Valentine's Day if you wanna make it for that. But it's also just a great everyday chocolate cake. Okay, whisk that together just a little bit, and then 1/2 cup of warm water goes in here. It may seem strange to add water to a chocolate cake, but that's what makes it really nice and moist. And now we combine everything. We're going to add 1/4 cup of buttermilk, 1 egg, 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda, and 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla. Okay, start to whisk this together before you add your chocolate, and then you can stream in your chocolate. Okay, you wanna get all the cocoa powder from the bottom of the bowl. This is your cake batter. That's it. You just wanna whisk it together really well. It's a really thin batter, don't be alarmed by that. Okay, we're ready to pour into our pan. This is a quarter size baking sheet pan. It measures 9 by 13, but it's only about 1 inch high. Sheet cake is a very thin cake that you typically pour a warm frosting on top of. And while the cake pieces are very thin, you can have a very large piece of chocolate cake. I just give this a little shake to even it out. And then it goes into my 350 degree oven for 15 minutes until you put a toothpick in the center and it comes out clean. My cake is done. I'm gonna let it cool just a little bit. We really wanna pour the icing on the cake when it's warm. So don't start making the icing until the cake comes out of the oven. So to a small saucepan, you need 7 tablespoons of butter. We're gonna melt them. This is a warm, pourable icing. Okay, my butter is finished melting, so I'm gonna turn off the heat and then we're gonna add all of the good stuff. Another 2 heaping tablespoons of cocoa powder. Oh, smells so chocolatey. And then because it's a pourable icing, we need a little bit of liquid to thin it out. We're gonna use 3 tablespoons of buttermilk because we already have buttermilk from making the cake. 1 full teaspoon of vanilla, and then powdered sugar. But first, let's whisk this together and make it nice and smooth because the cocoa powder can clump up a little bit. And then 2 heaping cups of powdered sugar. It will take a little bit to come together, but just keep stirring it. This is what you're looking for. Pourable, no lumps, smooth. Oh, could just eat this by itself. All right, it's time to pour our warm icing all over our warm cake. Oh, it's so beautiful. This is the consistency you want. Just go ahead and pour it and it will spread out. Just using a spatula to spread the frosting to the edge. You can also tilt the pan to get it to go in all of the corners. And then if you cut it into about 6 big slices, you get a great portion, but then you don't have a ton of chocolate cake left over. I think you're going to love this Texas chocolate sheet cake made in a quarter-size baking pan. For the full recipe, visit dessertfor2.com.